Hello and welcome to the Deep State Consciousness podcast. I have Fiona Robertson back here again today. A couple of months ago, Fiona and I had a conversation about her work doing self-inquiry, living inquiry sessions with people. And after that, we got chatting about the application of this kind of thought to politics and political arguments. And it's something Fiona had written a chapter in her book about, which really caught my eye. So we arranged to come back on and have a bit of a chat about that. Good morning, Fiona.
Hi, good to be here.
Maybe just really briefly for a start, summarize the work you do so anyone who hasn't seen the previous interview knows what we're at.
Yeah, so the inquiries are a way to deeply investigate whatever our experience is in all its layers. So typically it involves unraveling beliefs, but that's not all of it. We also go into all the structures that create difficulties in our lives in some way. So that might be around self-beliefs, beliefs about ourselves which aren't particularly helpful or conducive to growth in some way. It's also to do with things like compulsions, old traumas, things like that. It's really a way of investigating what's here and allowing it to unravel in a natural, organic way.
Okay, so a typical day for you might be interacting with people with issues around anxiety or addiction, but you mentioned you've also had people come to you in recent months because they felt, let me see if I'm getting this right, like kind of like emotional upheaval over some of the political events, whether it's Brexit or Trump, and that's where we kind of left off with when we were chatting afterwards last time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my sense of it is that whatever's happening in our internal world is obviously affected or impinged upon in some way by the wider world. So we can't simply contain sessions to the personal in a sense. We inevitably move wider out, be that into the political, or sometimes even the what we might call the mystical or more spiritual realms in some way. But I think we can't help to, all of us interact with the wider world in some way, whether we consider ourselves political or not. Mm. And it's certainly something that comes up in sessions reasonably often, that we find ourselves, people find themselves deeply affected by things going on in the world. Yeah.
And you wrote this chapter of your book on realizing the political is personal.
Yeah.
I think to get that the right way around every time, because it's a reversal of a feminist phrase, right, from the 70s, that the personal is political.
Yes.
Just maybe explain, touch on what the feminists meant by that, and then what you mean when you swap the words around.
Yeah. My understanding of the original phrasing that the personal is political is really to do with the fact that the structures around the personal realm, so things like marriage or even relationship, happens within the context of politics. That there are political aspects to that you could say, for example, with marriage, that it was always a political and or economic structure in the first place. So that's my understanding of what was originally meant, that we can't say that the personal realm is somehow separate or devoid of politics. My sense of it was that likewise, and this is a both and rather an either or, likewise we could equally say that the political is personal in the sense that everything from the shaping of our views, our emotional responses to political events, all of that is also coming from the space of the personal. So we can't really divorce our personal realm from our political views any more than we can divorce our personal realm from the politics the other way around.
Okay, and one of the reasons we thought this might be a fun thing to do is because you've traditionally, I think it's fair to say, associated with the kind of political left.
Yeah, broadly speaking. I mean, I was, well, I came of age, in fact, in 1979, the year that Margaret Thatcher came to power in the UK. And I think it's fair to say that probably about 21, when I finished university, I came out to one of the largest dole queues that had ever been seen in the UK, well, certainly since the 30s. So that I started to get interested in politics in the early 1980s, and throughout the Thatcher years, when my sense was that it was a more clear-cut business, in a sense, that there was the government and Thatcher, there was the left, and there wasn't much ground in between, really.
Right.
So at that point, it was a pretty clear-cut choice for me, which side I stood on, so to speak.
Okay, yeah, and the reason we thought it might be interesting then is because I don't know where I sit on the spectrum, but I'm not on the left, right? Which for me, it's interesting going along to the kind of spirituality events we might have been together at sometimes, because there is a substantial swing to the green left there in terms of what people, the kind of positions people would take and the candidates they would support and reject and that kind of thing. And what I often find happens is around about the second day, political conversations start to emerge because people who are interested in their own inner world of consciousness and finding a sense of deeper identity and emotional and psychological resolution are also the kind of people who are often interested in transforming the world into a better place. And
Yeah.
I do notice, I tend to sit back and observe a bit these conversations, but when people are talking about the spiritual stuff, because they've all been drawn to the same group, there's a lot of agreement goes on. People by and large have the same perspectives. But when it gets to the political, there's still a fair amount of agreement, but not entirely. And that can be surprising for participants sometimes, because I think we've probably all done this at some point in our lives, but we've assumed there's a direct link between our inner religious, spiritual views, our moral values, our sense of ethics, and who we would vote for at the ballot box. And therefore it's the right choice. Okay.
Yes.
Good people, virtuous people, people who want the best and want to share their toys and everyone to play fair would definitely vote this way and would definitely have these kind of views on economics. And people who are somehow other, or people who are selfish, or they just don't quite get it, or they're short-sighted, only those kind of people would vote in the other direction. And I don't expect to meet those kind of people here. So for me, it's interesting because as I try and sort of sit back and observe these things a bit more now, but I do see a look of real incredulity arising sometimes. What? You think that kind of? So that's what goes on there. And I wondered, I suppose, how you find that, and also the kind of self-examination you've done around where your positions come from.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm smiling partly is because whatever our views are, we all believe we're in the camp of the good, don't we?
Absolutely.
So it's,
there might be some people that don't, right? You might get there might be some Dr. Evil types in the world, but I've never met one. Right?
I haven't met anybody yet that says, well, my politics are this way because
I'm
I want
selfish
the
and greedy
worst for
and
people. Yes,
the slave trade. Yeah,
absolutely. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We all position ourselves in that way, which I think is a natural thing. And one of the things that also helped me to understand what was going on with political thinking was to come across the idea of certainty bias. I think you've probably read about that.
I've read your chapter on it.
Oh, right, yeah.
You sent me an article.
That because being in an uncertain space, either externally or internally, is associated with feeling unsafe or threatened in some way, we tend to hold on to certainty purely because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel more secure, less threatened. And apparently research has shown that people will hold on to certainty even when it's been shown to be invalid factually. So the idea that we're swayed by factual argument is actually far less true than we like to believe. So this started me thinking, because obviously we tend to assume that our political views are formed out of rationality and reason and intellectual rigor, don't we?
Yeah.
And what I began to see was that actually that's not necessarily the case, that we can have a much more emotional, much more primal, even sometimes, sense of belonging or certainty, or all of those things can come into play. And what we presume are facts, of course, aren't necessarily facts. But more importantly than that, I think when we start to come inwards and look at the things that are running behind the scenes and perpetuating our political stances, we find that below the 1/10 of the iceberg that's on the surface, which is our outward political views, they're informed by this whole 90% under the surface, which is not to do with the part of us that's rational or logical necessarily. And I think when we start to tap into that, it's not necessarily that our views will massively change or that we'll swing from one side to the other, or although, there may be some modifications in that. I think it's that we get much clearer on what's going on, and therefore less attacking of others' views, more measured potentially in how we put them across, and clearer on where we're coming from, I'd say.
And what did that inquiry lead to in yourself when you look beneath the surface? Maybe I'll say mine in a minute. But what did?
Yeah,
what did
I mean, one of the first things I saw, and I wrote about this in the original article, was seeing that my response to what we often call the 1%, the rich and the bankers and so on, was partly fueled by an inner sense, and it was unconscious until I saw it, that I have to be modest, that I have to play myself down. And it covered a whole range of things, really. Don't boast, don't big yourself up in some way, and also be modest in terms of consumption and spending and all of those things. And I recognize that I do I am modest not just because I'm good, as it were, which is how I'd often seen it. Like, well, I'm not a massive consumer because I'm doing the right thing. Yeah. That actually there was something deeper than that running, which was really about a kind of self-suppression. And it was old childhood stuff, messages that I'd got, things I'd interjected or taken on. And I was then projecting that in some way onto people who have more than me materially, or have more than the vast majority of us. And that just loosens something up. I mean, it's not then that I thought, I didn't then come to a position of thinking that, oh well, inequality's all right then. But it did show me, it was the first time I really saw in detail, wow, okay, those views are formed by something personal.
Okay, and did it shift your feeling towards the Bill Gates and Richard Bransons of this world, the kind of 1%? Did you notice, I don't know, I mean, I'm not necessarily that your view on what the top tier tax rate should be changed, but maybe a more feeling?
Yes. And I think that's an interesting distinction to make, because I realized that what I was doing was thinking that there was something essentially inherently bad with those people, And certainly, you know, when I think about that now, particularly people who haven't inherited that position, I do feel a little differently about them, yes, because I could see that actually things like the top tier tax rate are really to the point politically. My feelings about those people more on a more personal level was actually the thing that changed somewhat, and it was really a settling of that, like just not getting so rattled about that sort of thing, not getting so emotional about it.